Hello and welcome to our lesson on urbanisation. Today our three key takeaway points are to define what push and pull factors are and link them to how they might impact urbanisation, to give examples of both of these different factors, so we want to understand quite a range of them, and then try to identify where they might be happening in the world, okay, whether it's going to be more developing nations or developed nations, and try and pull together those ideas. So if you have a pen and paper, that would be brilliant to make any notes as we go through. So to begin with, we'll start with this picture here. Okay, we've got two pictures. First of all, just think about what you think the people's quality of life might be in each of these pictures and why it might be like that. Okay, obviously there are two extremes there. So think about the quality of life. What might it be like? And we'll get a few annotations as we go through. Potentially what you can also do is imagine which one you prefer to live in and why, okay? So link it towards your own life's work. So what we'll do, so we'll just try and get a few annotations. So obviously quality of life always comes to how happy people are, what services, what amenities they have. The more of those things they will have, the better their quality of life will be. So if we look at the image on the left, we can probably identify a few things. So we can see that there is a dirt track there. We can see that there's a lot of vegetation. We can see that it's also quite hot and sunny there. We can see that there's also a basic little hut, a home, okay? So we can make the assumption that we're in a developing nation, okay? Okay, so that's the first assumption that we can make. In terms of these things that we can identify, we mentioned that we can see there is a dirt track. Okay, so that might mean that there's poor access, so poor road access for the people who live there. Okay, they might be isolated as well, which is why that development hasn't actually got towards them yet. Okay, we can see poor quality housing. Okay, which might be a sign of poverty, okay, lack of money. Okay, perhaps low income employment. We can also see a lot of vegetation. Okay, so a lot of vegetation, which basically means that they might be in a rural environment, so they might be in the countryside. Okay, and our final thing that we can probably identify is the weather. So it looks like there's hot sunny weather. Okay, which could be a good thing, so it could be nice to have weather there, but also extremes can be dangerous. Okay, and we can assume that it's going to be a hot environment, because clear skies, we can see a lot of vegetation. We can also see the tracks are relatively dry, can't see any rivets in them or little ditches. So we know that we're basically looking at really potentially a really dry place. If we counteract that to the other things that we can see, so here we can see a freshwater supply. Okay, we can see loads of skyscrapers here and over here. So a lot of buildings. We can see bridges, tarmac roads. Okay, we can see, what else can we see? Ships going across there. Okay, we can also put down the fact that it's a clear day. Obviously weather does change, so clear skies, so we can put down potentially a more favorable climate. Okay, so we'll just get these key points jotted down. What else can we identify? So we got skyscrapers. We can see high density buildings, so many people there. So buildings, which also means population. There are a lot of people living here, so there might be reasons for that. We can see ships, which can show potentially trade, or it definitely shows some movement, some migration, something happening there. So it shows us that there's transport taking place. Could be people, could be goods. Okay, we can see that they've got tarmac roads. Okay, and also we can identify bridges as well. So hopefully you've identified that that is London. Okay, and the roads and bridges show good infrastructure. Okay, so ultimately we can make the assumption that there is more wealth in the image on the image on the right. Okay, so that is our key thing that we've identified. So there's more wealth. There's potentially there's more expensive buildings put in, more transport, more trade, which might mean more job opportunities. We've got a lot of investment into roads, bridges, getting people from A to B. You can see that wealth of buildings. We know there's a lot of people moving to those areas. So we can assume that they've been looked after as well. We can also see some manicured lawns right around here as well. Okay, so gardens. So we can see that there's more wealth there. Okay, we can see over in the image on the left, there's going to be clearly there's less wealth there. Okay, so in terms of our quality of life, obviously we're putting together some broad assumptions, but we can assume that the image on the right will have a lower quality of life compared to the image on the left. Okay, and this is what's basically triggered for a lot of people who would prefer to live in a city with luxuries that we can see. It pushes this massive shift of people moving from A to B. Okay, and this is what we call the movement of those people. It's called migration. And this is happening in particular through the expansion of urban areas, which is called urbanisation. Okay, what I'll do is I'll just change the colour of that. We'll change it to that colour. Okay, and I'll just highlight the box behind it, make it really clear. Okay, so this is the process that we're experiencing, and what we'll do, we'll recap it a little bit more in the next slide as well. So you get this movement for where there's lower quality of life to a place where we picture a higher quality of life, where there's more wealth to be had, okay, and people can have the luxuries that everyone kind of wants. So we'll clear this and we'll move over to the next slide. So ultimately, urbanisation is the growth of these urban areas or the built up environment. So when we're talking about urban areas, we are talking about the built up environment. Okay, now they can be in developed countries, they can be in developing countries, but ultimately this expansion of urban areas leads to what we call an urban sprawl. And it's down to these people moving from the countryside to the city, okay? And there'll be different reasons for that. So we've got, and we're just going to identify, and I'll highlight in red, we've got push factors where people are forced to leave an area. Okay, so if we think about the image that we started off with, it might be that they haven't, they're running out of money, they don't have any decent jobs, or there isn't many employment opportunities in their area. Okay, there can also be pull factors. These are things or reasons that entice people to move to an area. They are luxuries, things that you picture wanting in your life, and you think, if I move there, I'm going to have all of those luxuries, all of those things. I'll live my better life over there. So I'm enticed to go to that area. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll pick out a few ideas. So potentially from what we looked at before, we can say that maybe a lack of work might be an example of a push factor, not being able to afford enough money to support your family. That might lead to people being forced to leave an area. Okay, so that would be one example. If we hop over to the other side, a pull factor, if we look at the previous image on the right, so we were looking at this basically sign of wealth. So potentially we could put down more money could be made. Okay, so higher wages, better wages. So what we'll do, we'll pick out a few other examples and then we'll see if we can differentiate them in a moment. So there will be a couple of pictures coming up that will help us pick out a few more. Okay, so when you're forced to leave an area, it's because you've lost everything or you cannot survive there anymore. So you're forced to move somewhere else. So in that picture on the right, we can see that a home has been destroyed. So this could be a natural disaster. Okay, for example, an earthquake has destroyed your home. You've lost everything that made up your life. And now you need to restart somewhere else. You need to rebuild your life. So a lot of people are forced to move towards the city for that. Okay. Sometimes we can see that image on the right there. So we're looking at a shopping center. We can see the bright lights, loads of things to do. You could get lost in one of those for a day. So we can see the luxuries of shopping centers. Okay. Having services, shops on your doorstep. Okay. So having the luxury of these shopping centers, bright lights. It's more enticing, it's exciting, it's something that people want to see, people want to be around. So with these ideas, what we will do is we'll look at, we've got a range of ideas and we'll see if we can differentiate between which ones are push and which ones are pull factors. Okay, so we'll hop over to the next slide. I'll just clear all of these. Okay, so same again, we'll highlight the boxes. We'll do pull for green and we'll do red for push. Take a moment just to look through some of these things. Just remember, push factors tend to be things that force people to leave an area. They're not things you want to move towards. Okay, so just bearing that in mind, and I'll put this in red. Push factors tend to be more negative, whereas pull factors tend to be more positive. They're things that you want in your life. Push factors are things you don't want. Pull factors are things you do want, things you're going to move for. So good climate has got to be a pull factor. Okay. nicer climate, a little bit like you want to go on holiday to a place with a nicer climate. That's a pull factor that entices you. Okay, flooding has got to be a bad thing that will force you away once you've lost your home or whatever you've had. More job opportunities. Yeah, if I can't find work, I'll be forced, or sorry, I'll be enticed to go to a place where there are more opportunities. I'd want to go there. Okay, where there's war, I'll be forced to leave. Okay, I don't want to live in a place. I'm not safe if I live in a place that is at war. A safer place, less crime, would be a pull factor, something I want to move towards. I'm enticed to move to a safer place. Better wages will be a pull factor. Fertile farmland, which means if you are a farmer, you can grow more crops. Okay. No schools. Okay. Well, I don't really want to live somewhere without any schools, so no schools would be something that would force you to leave an area. No healthcare would be a push factor. That's something that's bad that will force you to leave an area. Crop failure, not enough food, will force you to leave an area. High crime, same again. Something that you don't want to live around, something that can force you to leave an area. Obviously, there are a lot more, okay? What we can see is that some of these trends, if I just highlight a few, in terms of no schools, no healthcare, crop failure, I guess potentially high crime, potentially war as well, but I've just highlighted as these three. Um, if we have a little look, those three are things that we can normally identify with developing nations that haven't got that rural infrastructure in place. So no rural healthcare, no schools in rural areas, and potentially poor farming conditions, maybe over farming, maybe not enough fertilizers. So these are push factors we tend to identify with um, developing nations. Positive things we tend to more associate with developed nations. Not always, okay, but more opportunities, okay. Better wages, safer living conditions. Not always the case. That's probably a little bit broad to say, but definitely no schools, no healthcare, crop failure. Those are things that we see in developing nations that mean it's difficult for people to live in those areas, so they're forced to move. So ultimately, what's happening is these people are being pushed out of where they live and they're being pulled towards the city. So urban environments will grow and sprawl outwards. That can have their own negative impacts alongside that. So they'll sprawl outwards and people will leave the countryside, move to the urban areas in the search for a better life. Okay, that's the bottom line, what these push and pull factors do. So we'll just have a quick recap before the end. So from our three key takeaways, we are basically looking at push factors when people are forced to move from an area, pull factors and when people are enticed to move to an area. Examples then would be a push factor would be a natural disaster like an earthquake. When you lose everything, you're forced to leave. A pull factor would be something you want to move for, so better wages, okay? And then you can provide a better life for your family or for yourself. And then to identify where they might be happening. Obviously, if we're in a developing nation where you've got these bigger extremes, there might be faster growth. Okay, so there might be a bigger shift from rural environments to the urban environments. Okay, and it tends to be in more developed countries. It's stabilized a little bit more because we tend to have higher populations living in urban areas. Okay, so faster growth tends to be in these developing nations where there's still a relatively large rural population. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.